Welcome to the 84th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. A vision and some truths in my past. Someone once said that growing up in a dysfunctional family is like getting to the middle of a movie and never understanding the plot. It made sense to me. The movie of my growing up years had certainly been confusing. So many times I'd sat trapped in the theatre of my young life, watching it all unfold, so to speak, on the screen, still none the wiser as to the meaning of it all. All I managed to conclude was that I was the sole victim of the plot, singled out to be the scapegoat, the person destined to carry all the wrongdoings, mistakes, and faults of the family on my shoulders, and to bear the everlasting pain. Even my beloved Din helped foster the image by declaring me to be a black sheep like himself, different from the rest, but a bad difference, not good. My perception, however, had been skewed. As I uncovered each childhood memory, here it is, this is what I felt, it was like this and this and this. A remarkable transformation happened in my heart. I developed compassion for the tight, tense little knot that had comprised my family. Insight into the dynamics of our difficult relationships, how we devoured each other, instead of working side by side, as healthy families do. I became aware of the corporate pain we shared, no inkling of it at the time, each one isolated in our individual suffering, each one believing that another member of the family must be responsible, not realizing we were all in it together, all victims in one way or another, the unsuspecting recipients of an inherited legacy of unfulfilled dreams. During my memory work, it wasn't a shock to discover that I blamed my mother for the treatment received from my father during my childhood. She hadn't protected me, and she ought to have done so. If she'd loved me, she would have prevented him from abusing me, or said something in my defense, not stayed silent. On and on went the accusations. They left a messy trail throughout the years. I had justified all the negativity directed towards her by reminding myself of her annoying habits and her seeming rejection of me. The real reason lay buried underneath those easy excuses for withholding affection from her. I'd had moments when I cared. A sadness enveloped me once in a while when parting from her, but due more to my childish feelings of abandonment than any concern for her. I held my mother responsible for all my pain. Therefore, I held her away from my heart. I stood in the kitchen one day contemplating this. Yes, my mother did allow the abuse to happen, so she was responsible. How could it be any other way? God decided to open my eyes to the truth, so he gave me a vision right there and then. He never bothered about where I happened to be when he showed up for serious communication. Some of my greatest insights from him have been revealed while in the bathroom, hardly the most reverent place on the planet, so why not the kitchen? The living room in my old childhood home in West Stockwell Street flooded the small kitchen area, obliterating my view of Daniel and Nathan in their high chairs. The vision took over as it unfolded before me. I heard the shouting of my father amidst the palpable sense of fear in the room as I became drawn into the familiar scene of long ago, one of many such scenes throughout my childhood. Each member of my tiny family inhabited the room, although I did not see them as much as sense their presence. My eyes focused on the figure, crouched down on the floor against the far wall, its hands raised to protect itself from harm. It was me where I always remembered myself being, fending off the blows raining down on my head and shoulders, begging for mercy, telling my daddy I'd do anything if he'd only stop. Desperation. I'll be good, I promise. Please, please, Daddy, stop. A voice in my left ear. That's not you. An indignant reply from me, even though I recognized the voice of authority. Of course that's me. Who else could it possibly be? The voice again, calm and resolute. The figure crouched down by the wall is your mother. Silence from me. The vision disappeared. Then I remembered. Something I chose to forget a long time ago. The year, 1966. Shortly after my father's funeral. I hid out in the scullery, tired of hearing Mum going on and on to Brian about my dad, my poor dad, so recently buried and so maligned by her, doubly sick with grief. Why did you have to go and die? Just when I'd found you, I cried. I could still hear the conversation through the closed door, although I tried not to. It was terrible, Mum said in a sad voice. I never dared to intervene when he was in one of his moods. If I had Brian, he'd have gone for me. I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it then with my grief so fresh and raw, but as the memory returned, I understood an important truth. My poor Mum lived with fear back then as I did, and it wasn't that she hadn't loved me or not wanted to prevent me from being hurt. She hadn't dared. I now saw her as a vulnerable human being whom I unfairly blamed for so much. I'd even secretly blamed her for not insisting my father see a doctor for his persistent coughing fits, the weak lung condition which kept him out of the war. He might have been diagnosed with the medical problem that killed him. He might have lived long enough to become an old man and see his grandchildren. He might have been able to be a real father to me at last. I'd had a lifelong, twisted love-hate relationship with my mother, and I never knew why. I never shared any of this with Ruth. She moved to a different part of the city, and although I still saw her at family gatherings, I was left with the old familiar loneliness and resentment at not having her close by anymore. I stood by the washing machine one day, feeding it its steady diet of laundry, a little disgruntled with my solitary life. No success finding a friend in the neighborhood to take Ruth's place. Somebody to have the odd cup of coffee with. My days were spent largely with my baby boys, and as rewarding as that was, I craved an adult friend to share some of the precious moments of motherhood with, still in the habit of knocking on doors and introducing myself to the strangers who opened them, only to meet with indifference for the most part. It brought to mind my dream in 1959 of the room with the 13 doors. No luck with the first 12 doors I knocked on. The person behind the 13th door, however, had been more receptive. He knew my name, but I hadn't bothered to ask him his. I talked out loud to God. I don't get it, I said, imagining he stood right there beside me. Why can't I have a close friend? Someone to go out to the park with, or the mall, or have over for coffee? It's not a lot to ask, is it? He gave me the clearest answer. It came the way the words from him always come, in my left ear, and in a voice I know very well. If you did, then you would not want me, or need me as much. No other explanation needed. A message loud and clear. I never craved a friend again. Women popped in and out of my life, and I accepted it. So I thought I had it all figured out. Then a few years later, the rest of the puzzle revealed itself. I came across John Bradshaw's writings on the wounded inner child. I learnt that the result of abuse in any form is toxic shame, a false guilt, worse than real guilt, which you can at least attempt to alleviate by recompense. With toxic shame, you feel inherently flawed. A sense of permanent damage constitutes the cruel paradox that is the essence of the wounded inner child. From Bradshaw's and other writings of a similar nature, I came to understand that the loss of any child's essence, their true self, lays waste everything they were ever meant to be. I concluded that my father must have been carrying his wounded inner child around with him while he acted out his frustrations on me. I only had to recall the tension existing between his father, Dindin, and himself to guess at what might have gone wrong in his young life. How far back did the wounds go? How many of my family members passed on the hurts, the orphan spirit trait, the lost child syndrome? Likewise, my mother probably sheltered a wounded inner child, calling out for attention. She often acted out in a victim role, a product of the loss of her mother at a young age and the perceived abandonment by her father. Later on, even though he invited her back into his life, she turned her back on the parent she claimed to adore as a child. How much guilt she must have suffered from that one act alone. Then my brother, seemingly successful at school and life, but with a marriage which ended in divorce and a career gone awry. How had he dealt with witnessing his parents' fights and the abuse of his sister? My little brother, the constant peacemaker, but at what cost? And then me. What about the little girl in my past who still invaded my present, staring back at me from old black and white photographs, especially the one taken at age 9 in Mildenhall? The photo with the line running through the face of the little girl, hiding pain behind her smile. Over the years, I kept that photo, mostly hidden away because of the fractured image it portrayed. But something stirred me to bring it out and dare to embrace it. If I didn't reclaim my wounded inner child, I knew she would continue to act in childish ways, hurting others out of ignorance, forever feeling cheated of complete love and acceptance. She railed against the rejection and pain of the past and dragged it into the present because she still yearned to be heard and have her needs met. Time to acknowledge her and bring her home, to a loving home, where she could be nurtured into adulthood. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading. And hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.